وَمَا أَفَاءَ اللَّهُ عَلَى رَسُولِهِ مِنْهُمْ فَمَا أَوْجَفْتُمْ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ خَيْلٍ وَلَا رِكَابٍ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يُسَلِّطُ رُسُلَهُ عَلَى مَن يَشَاءُ وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ.
Whatever Allah has taken away from them and bestowed as spoils on His messenger, for which you spurred neither horses nor camels, but Allah grants authority to His messengers over whomsoever He pleases. Allah has power over everything.
11. From here to the end of verse 10, Allah explains how the lands and properties that were restored to the Islamic State after the exile of the Bani and Nadir are to be managed and administered. As it was the first occasion that a land was conquered and included in the Islamic territory, and many more lands were destined to be conquered in the future, the law governing the conquered lands was enunciated at the outset. Here, a noteworthy point is that Allah at this place has used the words, Ma'afallahu Allah raziyalaihi minhum, whatever Allah restored to His messenger from them. These words clearly imply that the rebels of Allah Almighty are not entitled to own the earth and things existing on it. If they have become their owners and are appropriating them, their ownership and appropriation of these things is, in fact, in the nature of usurpation of a master's property by a dishonest servant. The real right of these properties is that these should be spent and used in the service and obedience of their real master, Allah, Lord of the worlds, according to His will, and that this use is possible only through the agency of the righteous believers. Therefore, the true position of the properties which pass from the ownership of the disbelievers into the hands of the Muslims as the result of a lawful war, is that their real owner has withdrawn them from his disobedient and disloyal servants, and restored them to his obedient and loyal servants. That is why, in the terminology of the Islamic law, such properties have been described as FAI, restored properties. 12. That is, the restoration of these properties to the Muslims is not the result of the effort of the actual fighting army so that the army on that basis may have the right that the properties may be distributed among the soldiers, but its real nature is that Allah by His bounty has given dominance to His messengers and the system that they represent over them. In other words, the passing of these properties into the Muslims' hands is not the direct result of the effort and struggle of the fighting army, but the result of the total strength that Allah has bestowed on His messenger and his community, and the system established by Him. Therefore, these properties are quite different in nature from the spoils of war and so cannot be distributed among the soldiers as such. Thus, the Sharia has made a distinction between Ghanima, spoils of war, and FAI, restored properties. The injunction in respect of the Ghanima has been given in Surah Al-Anfal, Ayat 41, and it is this: it should be divided in 5 parts, 4 parts of which be distributed among the fighting army and the 5th deposited in the public treasury, Bayt al-Mal, and expended on the items mentioned in the verse. As for the FAI, the injunction is that it should not be distributed among the army, but it should be reserved for the items of expenditure being stated in the following verse. The distinction between the two has been made plain by the words, "You have not rushed your horses and camels on them," which imply the military operations. Thus, the properties which are taken as a direct result of such operations are the Ghanima, and those which are not the result of these operations are the FAI. The distinction between Ghanima and FAI that has been mentioned in this verse has been explained in greater detail by the jurists of Islam. Ghanima are only those transferable properties which are taken from the enemy during military action. Other than these things, e.g. lands, houses and other transferable and non-transferable properties of the enemy, are excluded from the definition of Ghanima and RFAI. The source of this explanation is the letter that Umar had written to Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas after the conquest of Iraq. In that letter he wrote, "Distribute the properties and goods which the soldiers of the army collected and brought to your camp among the Muslims who participated in the war, and leave the lands and the canals with those who work on them so that the proceeds thereof are used for the salaries of the Muslims." Abu Yusuf, Kitab al-Kharaj, page 24, Abu Ubaid, Kitab al-Amal, page 59, Yahya bin Adam, Kitab al-Kharaj, pages 27 to 28, 48. On this very basis, Hassan Basri says, whatever is taken from the enemy camp is the right of those who won victory over it, and the lands are for the Muslims. Yahya bin Adam, page 27. And Imam Abu Yusuf says, whatever the Muslims take from the enemy troops, and whatever goods and arms and cattle they collect and bring to their camp is ghanima. From this 1/5 will be deducted and the rest distributed among the soldiers. Kitab al-Kharaj, page 18. The same is the opinion of Yahya bin Adam, which he has expressed in his Kitab al-Kharaj, page 27. Even more than this, what makes the distinction between Ghanima and Fai is that after the Battle of Nahawand, when the Ghanima had been distributed and the conquered lands had been included in the Islamic State, a man named Saib bin Akra found 2 bags of jewels outside the fort. He was confused whether it was the Ghanima which should be distributed in the army, or the Fai which should be deposited in the Bayt al-Mal. Consequently, he came to Al-Madinah and put the matter before Umar, who decided that it should be sold and the price should be deposited in the Bayt al-Mal. From this it becomes clear that Ghanima are only those transferable properties which are taken by the soldiers during the war. After the war is over, the transferable properties also, like the non-transferable properties, become Fai. Imam Abu Ubaid relates this event and says, the properties that are seized from the enemy by the use of force, when the war is still in progress, are Ghanima, and what is taken after the war is over, when the territory has become Dar al-Islam, abode of Islam, is Fai, which should be reserved for the common people of the Dar al-Islam. The law of the 1/5 comes, will not be applicable to it. Kitab al-Amal, page 254. After defining Ghanima thus, the rest of the properties, wealth and lands, which pass from the disbelievers' ownership to the Muslims may be divided into 2 main kinds. First, those which are taken as a result of actual fighting, Van-Watten in fiqh terminology. Second, those which are taken by the Muslims as a result of the peace terms, whether peace is concluded because of the pressure of the military power of the Muslims, or their dread and awe. And in this are also included all those properties which pass into the Muslims' ownership in every other way than as a result of actual fighting. The differences that have arisen among the jurists of Islam have been only concerning the first kind of the properties in order to determine their correct legal position, for they do not come under those upon which you have not rushed your horses and camels. As regards to the second kind of the properties, all agree that they are Fai, for the Quran has explicitly laid down the injunction about them. Below we shall discuss in detail the legal position of the first kind of the properties.
ما أفاء الله على رسوله من أهل القرى فلله وللرسول ولذي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل كي لا يكون دولة بين الأغنياء منكم وما آتاكم الرسول فخذوه وما نهاكم عنه فانتهوا واتقوا الله إن الله شديد العقاب.
Whatever from the possessions of the townspeople Allah has bestowed on His messenger belongs to Allah and to the messenger and to his kinsfolk and to the orphans and to the needy and to the wayfarer, so that it may not merely circulate between the rich among you. So accept whatever the messenger gives you and refrain from whatever he forbids you, and fear Allah. Verily, Allah is most stern in retribution.
13. In the preceding verse what was pointed out was why these properties should not be distributed among the fighting army like the spoils, and why the legal injunction concerning them is different from that concerning the spoils. Now in this verse it is being stated as to who are entitled to have a share in these properties. The first share in these is of Allah and His Messenger. The detail of how the Prophet, peace be upon him, acted on this injunction has been related by Malik bin Aus bin al-Hadithan on the authority of Umar. Thus, the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to take from it necessary expenses for himself and his family, and the rest he used to spend on arranging arms and conveyances for jihad. Bukhari, Muslim, Musnad Ahmad, Dud, Tirmidhi, Nasai and others. After the passing away of the Prophet, peace be upon him, this share was transferred to the public treasury of the Muslims so that it is spent in the service of the mission which Allah had entrusted to His Messenger, peace be upon him. Imam Shafi'i is reported to have expressed the opinion that the share which was specifically meant for the Prophet's, peace be upon him, person, is for his caliph after him, for the Prophet, peace be upon him, was entitled to it on the basis of his office of leadership and not on the basis of the office of apostleship. But the view of the majority of the Shafi'i jurists in this matter is the same as of the other jurists, viz. that this share now is reserved for the religious and collective welfare of the Muslims, and not for any particular person. The second share is of the kinsfolk, and this implies the kinsfolk of the Prophet, peace be upon him, i.e. the Bani Hashim and the Bani al-Muttalib. This share was set aside so that, besides meeting his own and his family's requirements, the Prophet, peace be upon him, could also fulfill his obligations towards those of his relatives who stood in need of his help, or whom he felt like helping. After the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, this ceased to be a separate and independent source, because like the right of the orphans and the wayfarers and the indigent among the Muslims, looking after the rights of the needy among the Bani Hashim and the Bani al-Muttalib also became the responsibility of the public treasury. However, they were treated as superior to others insofar as they had no share in the zakat. Abdullah bin Abbas has related that in the time of Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman, the first 2 shares were dropped and only the remaining 3 shares, i.e. those for the orphans and the indigent and the wayfarers, were kept as of those entitled to fai. Then Ali also acted on the same in his time. Muhammad bin Ishaq has related on the authority of Imam Muhammad Baqir that although Ali's personal opinion was the same as of the people of his house, that this share should be given to the relatives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, he did not think that he should act against the practice of Abu Bakr and Umar. Hassan bin Muhammad bin Hanafiya says that after the Prophet, peace be upon him, a difference of opinion arose about these 2 shares, i.e. the share of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the share of his relatives. Some people said that the first share should go to the Prophet's, peace be upon him, caliph. Some said that the second share should go to the relatives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and still others said that the second share should be given to the relatives of the caliph. At last, a consensus was reached that both the shares be spent on the requirements of jihad. Atta bin Saib says that Umar bin Abdul Aziz in his time had started sending the share of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the share of the relatives to the Bani Hashim. The opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa and of most of the Hanafi jurists is that in this matter the same practice is correct as was being followed in the time of the righteous caliphs. Abu Yusuf, Kitab al-Kharaj pages 19 to 21. Imam Shari'i's opinion is that both the rich and the needy from among the people whose being descended from the Bani Hashim and the Bani al-Muttalib is confirmed, or is well known, can be given shares from fai. Mughni al-Muhtaj. The Hanafis say that only their needy people can be helped from this. However, their right to this is greater than that of others. Ruh al-Mani. According to Imam Malik, there is no restriction on the government in this matter. It can spend on any head that it deems fit and proper. But the better course is that it should give preference to the people of the Prophets, peace be upon him. House. Hashiyya ad-Dasuki al-Hashr al-Kabir. About the remaining 3 shares there is no dispute among the jurists. However, the difference between Imam Shafi'i and the other Imams is that according to Imam Shafi'i the total properties of fai are to be divided into 5 equal parts, 1 part of which is to be spent on the above-mentioned heads in such a way that 1/5 of it is spent on the common benefits of the Muslims, 1/5 on the Bani Hashim and the Bani al-Muttalib, 1/5 on the orphans, 1/5 on the indigent, and 1/5 on the wayfarers. However, Imam Malik, Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Ahmad do not concur with this division. Their opinion is that the whole of fai is for the welfare and common benefit of the Muslims. Mughni al-Muhtaj. 14. This is one of the most important verses of the Quran, which lays down the basic principle of the economic policy of the Islamic community and government. Wealth should circulate among the whole community, and not only among the rich, lest the rich should go on becoming richer day by day and the poor becoming poorer. This policy has not merely been enunciated in the Quran, but for the same objective the Quran has forbidden interest, made the zakat obligatory, enjoined that comes, 1/5, be deducted from the booty, exhorted the Muslims to practice voluntary charity, has proposed such forms of different kinds of atonements that the flow of wealth is turned towards the poor classes of society, and has made such a law of inheritance that the wealth left by every deceased person spreads among the largest circle of the people. Apart from this, stinginess has been condemned and generosity commended as a noble moral quality. The well-to-do people have been told that in their wealth there is a definite share of the beggar and the indigent, which they must discharge not as charity but as the right of the concerned people, and the law enjoined. In respect of a major source of revenue of the Islamic government, IFAI, is that its one portion must necessarily be spent on supporting the poor class of society. In this connection, it should also be borne in mind that there are two main sources of the revenue of the Islamic government, zakat and FAI. The zakat is charged from the Muslims on their total extra capital, cattle, wealth, trade goods and agricultural produce, which is over and above the minimum exemption limit, nisab, and most of it is reserved for the poor. And FAI comprises all the revenues including jizya and taxes which are received from the non-Muslims. A major part of this is also set aside for the poor. This gives a clear hint to the effect that an Islamic government should manage its revenues and expenditure, and the financial and economic affairs of the country on the whole in such a manner that the wealthy and influential people are not allowed to have their monopoly over the means and resources of wealth, and the flow of wealth is either turned from the poor to the rich, nor it should remain circulating only among the rich. 15. In view of the context, the verse means, accept without question whatever decision the Prophet, peace be upon him, gives about the management of the properties of the Bani and Nadir, and likewise about the distribution of FAI properties and goods afterwards. One should take whatever the Prophet, peace be upon him, gives him, and the one whom he does not give anything, should neither protest nor demand it. But since the words of the command are general, its application is not restricted to the distribution of the FAI properties and goods only, but its intention is that in all matters the Muslims should obey the Prophet, peace be upon him. This intention of the command becomes all the more clear when we consider that as against whatever the messenger gives you. The words used are, whatever he forbids you, and not, whatever he does not give you. If the object of the command were restricted to call obedience to the distribution of all properties and goods only, then as against whatever he gives you, the words should have been, whatever he does not give you. The use of the forbidding or restraining words in this context by itself shows that the object of the command is to enjoin obedience to the Prophet, peace be upon him, in whatever he commands and forbids. The same thing has been stated by the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself. According to Abu Hurairah he said, when I command you to do a thing, do it as far as you can, and when I forbid you to do a thing, restrain from it. Bukhari, Muslim. About Abdullah bin Masud it has been related that once during a speech he said, Allah has cursed the woman who practices such and such a fashion. Thereupon a woman approached him and asked, wherefrom have you derived this thing? For I have not seen such a thing anywhere in the Book of Allah. Abdullah replied, had you studied the Book of Allah, you would certainly have found it therein. Have you not read the verse, Ma atakum ar-razulu fa-kuduhu wa ma nahakum anhu fantahu. Take whatever the messenger gives you, and refrain from whatever he forbids you. When she said that she had read this verse, Abdullah said, so the Prophet, peace be upon him, has forbidden this act, and has given the news that Allah has cursed the women who practice it. The woman agreed that she had understood the command. Bukhari, Muslim, Musnad Ahmad, Musnad ibn Abi Hatim.
للفقراء المهاجرين الذين أخرجوا من ديارهم وأموالهم يبتغون فضلا من الله ورضوانا وينصرون الله ورسوله أولئك هم الصادقون.
It also belongs to the poor emigrants who have been driven out of their homes and their possessions, those who seek Allah's favor and good pleasure and help Allah and His Messenger. Such are the truthful ones.
16. This implies those people who at that time had been expelled from Mecca and other parts of Arabia only because they had embraced Islam. Before the conquest of the territory of the Bani an-Nadir, these emigrants had no permanent means of sustenance. Therefore, it was commanded that in the properties which were then taken, and in the FAI properties which are taken in future, there is also a share of these people along with the common poor people and the orphans and the wayfarers. With these properties all such people should be helped, who are forced to emigrate for the cause of Allah and His Messenger, peace be upon him, to the abode of Islam. Accordingly, the Prophet, peace be upon him, distributed a part of the properties taken from the Bani an-Nadir among the emigrants, and the oases which the Ansar had set aside for the support and maintenance of their emigrant brothers were returned to them. But it is not correct to think that the emigrants had this share in the FAI only at that time. In fact, the intention of the verse is to point out that till resurrection it is the duty of the Islamic government of the country to settle the people who are exiled and compelled to take refuge in it because of being Muslims, and to enable them to stand on their feet economically. And it should also spend on this head from the FAI properties besides the zakat funds.